Starting for now. So thank you once again for joining us. I know this is a little bit of a smaller group today, but I'm very thankful to have all of you. And we're going to start just really quick with the agenda. I first would like to have like an introduction role because we have our new executive director here with us. It's Alex Kamadou. So in order for him to also get to know all of us, I think it would be nice to hear what we do, where we are, and some of the things that we have been up to lately. Okay, so why don't we start with Kara?
Hi, everyone. I'm Kara Kopplin. I work for Permobil in the US, and I'm very active in the standards committees. I chair the US Committee for Wheelchair and Seating Standards, and I'm active in the ISO group. I'm also the liaison to the European SEN standards work. So nice to see everyone and be a part of this group.
Thank you, Kara. For those who just joined, I just wanted to share with all of you, we are doing a quick introduction role since we have our new executive director, Alex Kamadou. So I'm just going to be pointing out your name so that we can say hi. Don, would you like to go next?
Sure. I'm Don Schoendorfer, founder, president of Free Wheelchair Mission. Been involved in the standards group since the very beginning.
Thank you. Matt?
How's my mic?
You sound good.
Okay, great. So my name's Matt McCambridge. These days, I'm an engineer at a metal 3D printing startup that I co-founded, but been volunteering with Whirlwind since 1999, and between about 2005 and 2015, I got to build wheelchairs with Handicap International, Whirlwind, do some testing with MIT. And during that time, ISWP was nice enough to give me some lab space, and I got to see their stuff in the field. So hoping to keep current with the field and hopefully contribute some institutional memory if possible.
Thank you.
What country are you in, Matt?
I am based in Cambridge, Massachusetts right now.
Oh, okay.
Jack, would you like to go next?
Yeah, hi, I'm Jack Freed. I work for Pitt and now also technically UPMC as a rehab engineer and research engineer for the Department of Rehab Tech and also at the CAT here in Pittsburgh. I recently got my master's in rehab technology, and I did a thesis doing work on raising the quality of wheelchair casters. And so that's kind of how my work kind of ties into all of this. And I also am doing work at Pitt on the Healthy Home project. So have my hands in kind of a little bit of everything right now.
Thank you, Jack. Can we continue with Bill?
Hi, everybody. I'm Bill Ammer. I operate Ammer Consulting. I'm a test facility outside of Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. I'm also the chairman of the United States RESNA Wheelchair Committee, and I'm the chairman of the ISO SC1 WG1 Wheelchair Standards Committee. I'm also involved with the Healthy Home Lab here at in Pittsburgh with the University of Pittsburgh, and glad to be here.
Thank you. Clive, would you like to go next?
Okay, I'm based in Bristol in the UK, and I work remotely for Steve at Kachinka Mobility. So we're doing some design work this end, and yeah, it'd be nice to get back out there. But at the moment, travel that way is not possible for me, so we do everything remotely. So.
Thank you. Evan, thank you for joining us. Would you like to introduce yourself to the group?
Sure. Evan Call, EC Service, a small test lab. Also teach at Weber State University as adjunct faculty. Involved in standards work at least 3 levels, and enjoy it very much, and salute you all for your continuing efforts in such important stuff.
Thank you. Tricia?
Hello, Tricia Karg from the University of Pittsburgh in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania in the United States. And engineer by training and work a lot with assisted product evaluation, clinical and laboratory, as well as development of assisted product standards. And I've been on the testing centers group for ISWP, but I've not been in the standards group. So I'm interested to see the activities there. I do work as well at international and national standards development levels, and I chair the Rehab Engineering and Assistive Technology Society of North America, RESNA, Assistive Technology Standards Board, which is the national entity that oversees assistive product standards in the US. So I'm happy the groups have merged and interested in seeing what's happening. Thanks.
Thank you. Dave, would you like to continue?
Yeah, so I work here at Pitt with Tricia and the rest of the team here. I'm an engineer also. I've been involved in standards in wheelchairs, wheelchair seat cushions, mattresses, and most recently dressings for pressure injury prevention. I do research in the area of tissue integrity management, everything from developing devices to evaluating them in the laboratory to conducting clinical trials. And yeah, happy to be here.
Thank you. Shauna, would you like to continue?
Hi, everybody. Shauna from South Africa in Cape Town. We design and manufacture a full range of pediatric wheelchairs and posture support equipment. That's sitting, standing, lying, as well as therapy equipment. But in terms of standards specifically, we're really interested in pushing the limits on testing equipment relevancy for under-resourced and rural areas. And to that end, we've been building an ISO test lab, and we're hoping to get that certified as a SACRA qualified or certified testing laboratory. And then as soon as that is complete, hopefully early next year, we'll start adding some more exploratory tests to our process so that we can start really looking deeply at appropriateness because of the serious inappropriateness of existing standards for this environment in which we work. Thanks.
Thank you, Shauna. I also want to excuse Dean Mubaiwa. He also works at ShonaQuip, but he's facing some power outages at the moment, so he's not going to be able to join us today. He just sent me a message. Jim, would you like to go next?
Yes, thanks. Yeah, I'm Jim Watson from Cranfield Impact Centre in the UK, and we get involved in crash testing of wheelchairs. So we have a dynamic sled facility that we conduct ISO 7176 tests and numerous other things that we crash test as well.
Thank you. Holly, would you like to continue?
Sure. Yeah, I'm also at University of Pittsburgh. I'm a third-year PhD student and in rehab science and technology. My background is engineering, and my work is in rolling resistance. So we have a piece of equipment that measures component level rolling resistance, and that's the focus of my research.
Thank you. Bonnie, I know you just joined, so I don't want to put you in the spot, but if you want to introduce yourself, please feel free to do so.
Sure, thank you. Hi, my name is Bonnie Gonzalez. I work for Wheelchair Mission, and my background is in mechanical engineering.
Thank you. Dr. P, would you like to introduce yourself? I know most of us know you, but just in case.
Sure. John Perlman, faculty at Pitt. And yeah, I mean, I think we'll talk a little bit more about this, but this is a unique time for ISWP, and that it's transitioning both leadership and also sort of the organizational, also like the organizational home. And so I'll talk about that in a minute, but really happy to have a big crowd join today and welcome our new executive director.
Thank you. And yeah, and I would like to also introduce Alex Camado, who has been working in the field for over 22 years, but I'm going to let you introduce yourself since we're fortunate to have you with us here today.
Sure. Thank you, Stephanie. And it's really such a delight to meet all of you. I had no idea that we have such a wealth of experience on this group. And so, yeah, good afternoon, good evening to some of you. I'm Alex Kamadou. I'm based in Johannesburg in South Africa. I'm an occupational therapist by background. I spent some years in South Africa, but cut my teeth and spent most of my years in the seating health system in the UK in the early 2000s, working first as a wheelchair therapist, and then went on to being wheelchair service manager and commissioner, and occupying roles in strategic roles at the Department of Health for quite some years before returning back to my home country, to South Africa, about 6 years ago. And for the last 6 years, I've been working in research and consulting in strengthening the health system, particularly around TB and HIV services. So I'm 2 months in the role, just basically still, catching my breath in terms of finding out what we do, what we need to do more often, what we need to do less of, and just really so glad to be part of the discussion today. So, thank you. Over to you, Steph.
Thank you. So coming back to the agenda after we have just completed all the introductions, I just want to talk about a little bit about what's going to happen today. So we're going to have some updates from Dr. Perman, and then we're going to have Kara Kopplin presenting actually on 2 different topics. Thank you for taking such a big effort on this. It's going to be the Flammability Standard and also the lab certification perspective. We're also going to have some updates from Bill on the ISO meetings. And finally, we can continue with some group updates. So with that, I'm just going to continue with, that was the introduction. And we're going to go with you, Kara. Thank you.
Steph, can I just interrupt for a minute? I saw Kiyoki jump on a little late, so maybe we can put him on the spot to do an introduction.
Thank you. Sorry, I missed you.
Oh, that's okay. I was late. Hi, I'm Kiyoki. It's great to be here with such a great crowd. I see some very impressive people here today. Look forward to learning from you. I'm CEO of Participant Assistive Products. We make products that are kind of better for less resource settings, more stable on rough terrain, more affordable. And I'm very grateful in particular to Bill Ammer here, because he did testing for us not long ago. So thank you for helping us get into the market. Good. Thanks.
Thanks. And I'll just steal the mic here for a few minutes. First of all, Kiyoki is modest in his introduction. He's also, like Matt, done the rounds at Whirlwind and Momentum, previous UCP wheels for a long time, so has been part of the sector for a long time. In terms of ISWP activities, like I mentioned, we have this transition in leadership, which Alex has formally been named by the board as executive director. We recently met sort of in person for the first time in Geneva in October, and that was well coordinated to have him invited to 2 important meetings. The first one is a meeting with our partners at AT Scale, and to make sure everybody's up to speed on who AT Scale is. It's a pooled funding mechanism that was set up by some major donors, with USAID taking the lead. The organization sits within UNOPS, which is a UN agency that can receive funding from the UN, from WHO, and then from the donor agencies. And it allows them to pool money to, in this case, AT Scale's focused on assistive technology, and they have, and I've shared before, some strategic priorities related to wheelchairs. And so we coordinated a meeting at the AT Scale headquarters in Geneva among several of the key stakeholders from, I would say, the development side of the sector, not the commercial side of the sector, as a follow-up meeting to a meeting that we had in a stakeholder meeting in 2018 in Bangalore. So it was really a refresher of what the priorities for the sector were. We covered several important topics. There's a report that will be out within, I think, the next couple of days. So you're welcome to, you'll learn about sort of all the topics covered. I think pertinent to this group specifically, we had Dennis Soderberg from UNICEF presented at that meeting in Geneva and talked about really what UNICEF saw as the value, the challenges of the wheelchair sector in terms of coordinating their tender. They did a solicitation to pull in wheelchairs for their essentially their product catalog. I think it was an interesting overview from a global purchaser of how fragmented the market is, how different manufacturers test, for different markets, and there's not a lot of harmonization of standards. And so that I think was a really good reminder for some of us, a good lesson for others, that we still have a long ways to go in terms of having these standards be operationalized by these global purchasers. We're still pretty far away from that. So Alex was at that meeting, and then we also had a meeting at the WHO related to service standards that will be published in April. Those will not specifically focus on products. They're focused on the workforce that's required to deliver appropriate wheelchairs. But of course, it's implied through any of these services that the products are of high quality. And so it will be reflected, but it gave us a really good opportunity to introduce Alex to the network of stakeholders, sort of both through the formalities of what the key activities are in the sector, as well as, sort of the more social aspects of just building relationships. So that's an update from ISWP. The other important update is related to this transition out of the university. So Alex being named as executive director took, it was like a 6 to 9 month search. I think we had over 100 people apply, and it was a really interesting recruitment process. And we're really excited to have Alex join, especially with the experience that he brings from the health system strengthening side and working in the NHS, because that is absolutely where the sector is going, which is through trying to build up benefits within the government sector for wheelchairs and assistive devices. And so his experience is really essential, I think, for ISWP to strengthen those relationships with government and help build programs to strengthen the services at a country level. The other aspects of the transition are that we have a separate nonprofit set up, and we're just getting sort of the machinery of that going. Right now, Alex is actually a contractor for Pitt. He will then be one of the first employees of this separate entity. We are taking what is currently the founding board of ISWP, which will be expanded to a full board, and we'll have voting members to sort of meet the typical governance structure of a nonprofit. That's coming up very soon. And then we also have, we're working through the final process of receiving another grant from USAID, which will be awarded directly to this new entity that we set up. And the expected amount is $1.5 million to really seed the entity moving forward, which will give a runway of a couple of years. And so that's all really good news. It also means that I am retiring ahead of Bill, at least in this role. And we will, at least at the current plan, is that ISWP is going to contract the university and myself, and a little bit of, a little time from me, a little time from Mary Goldberg, a little time from Steph, and some time from Nancy Augustine, to basically support the transition and support operations like we have been, but in a much sort of reduced effort. So that's the current plan, and that we think will help help to continue to build the relationships, and also be able to leverage the academic research engine that we have at the university, including help support additional grant writing to support ISWP. So that was my quick ISWP update. It's a really exciting time. There's been a ton of dedicated effort to support this transition, and we I think the product standards are raised as major priorities when we're at WHO, when we're at AT scale, and really learning how we can strengthen and harmonize these so they can really be operationalized at the country level, I think is an important future from my perspective. But it's really Alex and the board that's going to drive the activities and the the key areas that ISWP focuses on in the future.
Thank you. I don't know if any of you have any questions for Dr. Perman. If not, we can proceed with Kara. Thank you. I think you should be good to share. I'm just going to stop mine.
Okay, thank you. All right. Yeah, thanks for the opportunity to talk about this relatively new standard for wheelchairs. And this is 16840-10, which is a flammability standard that was published about 8 years ago, but wasn't adopted. And so we have had in the last 3 years a lot of attention within our working group on looking at the standard and its appropriateness and improving it and evolving it. So that's what I'm going to walk you through today, and we'll be glad for any questions. So this is a standard that is a simulated cigarette. It's an electronic ignition source specific to wheelchair seating. Originally, when it was published, it was just for cushions that provide tissue integrity, but it has since been expanded to apply to all of the contact surfaces and postural support devices of a wheelchair. So prior to this, and even unfortunately still today, we have a number of standards that customers or regulatory bodies often ask for wheelchair seating to meet different flame or cigarette requirements. In the US, we have Cal 117, which is a cigarette. And in Europe, there's a furniture standard also with an actual cigarette. Then we have open flame requirements. We previously had a standard 7176-16 that applied to all of the surfaces that did not necessarily provide tissue integrity. And we had EN 1021-2 in Europe, again, open flame, developed for furniture. So we are, of course, not providing furniture. Our wheelchairs have medical purposes, and one of those key purposes is to help reduce the risk of pressure injuries. So when we looked at the standard, we wanted to revisit it and make sure we were doing the right things for the user with taking this approach of a simulated cigarette in place of open flame requirements. So we looked at those intended uses and the ways that the function of a cushion or a support surface could be compromised if FR materials were needed. We looked at the literature regarding the known health hazards from flame retardants and the incidence rate of fire and flame events with wheelchairs. How often is this a problem? And is this a problem that wheelchair seating should be addressing? We also investigated the global shift to remove flame retardants and open flame testing for furniture. So for example, in the US, there is no longer any open flame testing requirement for couches, sofas, for chairs, whether they're in the home or in public areas. And then of course, we went back to pressure injury risk. That's what we're trying to mitigate. And we took a look at overall benefits versus risk. Then from a laboratory perspective, the other reason that this standard is intriguing and is of interest to us is because it is a much more controllable and repeatable ignition source than an open flame and certainly than a cigarette. So there's a full risk analysis that was done considering all of these things. It is available on the ISO website in a publicly accessible spot, and we'll send this around so that you have access to this. But just at a glance, this is what that report looks like, taking a very risk management structured approach. citing all of the literature that was reviewed and state of regulatory requirements. So the conclusion of all of that, well, let me pause here. Incidence rate was one of the main questions. How often does this occur? So we found there was some research that was done in 1990 looking at 10 years of death certificates of people that use wheelchairs, and it broke down the causes of those deaths. When there was a serious wheelchair-related accident, 3.3% of the population experienced that. How many of those were fatal? And then how many of those were related to burns? And when we drilled down to that number, we found that it was fewer than 4 per million. So this is a very low incidence rate that we're often trying to address with the design. With our risk process, we also pulled all of our members to check in their country's databases. We used the FDA MAUDE database. We searched all the records that could be found, and what we found reflected these extremely low numbers. On the other side, we know that pressure injuries kill 60,000 people a year in the US alone. So again, going back to the fact that our seating is not furniture, our seating has a medical purpose. Let's focus on the benefits we provide and not unnecessarily try to mitigate a risk that's a very low occurrence rate. So the document was revised in 2021. Considering all of this, we found some details in the wiring diagrams and the components that needed some corrections and clarifications. But having gone through this risk process, we decided that the scope should be applied to all of the wheelchair support surfaces, basically those soft contact support surfaces, PSDs, backs, head supports, cushions, all of those. As a result, ISO 7176, which is the previous open flame test for wheelchairs, was replaced by 16840-10 when it was published in 2021. And we also noted that there may be other ignition sources beyond the cartridge that was originally proposed that could give the same temperature profile. And so we wanted to expand the opportunity for labs to use other solutions if they could meet the requirements of the test. An important distinction between this test and previous open flame and cigarette tests is that those standards allow for the test object to have the ignition source placed on it, and then for active open flaming for up to 2 minutes. So in this standard, we allow no flaming whatsoever. So initially, we would get some reaction to the standard saying, well, you're making it less safe. Well, you could theoretically pass an open flame test with a cushion that was on fire, like a campfire, for 2 minutes, and that would still be a pass. Whereas with this test, we're not allowing any flaming at all. So the committee's recommendation to utilize ISO 16840-10 is also publicly available on the website. There's a nice letter from the committee explaining this analysis, and that goes hand in hand with the risk report. So those are resources that labs can use, and manufacturers, researchers, people talking to regulatory bodies about what standard is appropriate. Our hope is that those documents with the standard will help shift public policy and requirements in different regions of the world for flammability for wheelchair seating. So a quick look at those key differences. This is on the left, EN 1021-2, the open flame furniture standard, which actually requires you to construct like a little couch and do the testing at the intersection of the back and cushion. So it's already a false construct for testing wheelchair components. On the right, you can see the test is designed specifically for backs and cushions and support devices of a wheelchair. 1021-2 did allow that 2 minutes of flaming, whereas 16840-10 allows no flaming. So really a high level difference is that the old standards are really tests of the time for a flame to extinguish, whereas 16840-10 tests the resistance to ignition and flaming. So same when we compare to 7176-16, we've made that same shift. So if you go to the ISO website, 7176-16, it states that it has been replaced. So once we were able to publish the new standard, we were still looking at different regions that recommend flame requirements for wheelchairs. And in Europe, we have two standards that we're held to, EN 12183 and 12184. I'm the liaison from the ISO standards group to the working group that was updating these standards. And they previously did not have any wheelchair seating standards within them at all. These were all wheelchair level, not looking at cushions and backs and PSDs and such. So that was my role to present all of those to them and then see which could be integrated into these documents as they were being updated. So 16840-10 was the flammability requirement that we recommended be included in these updates. And after multiple meetings with the groups and the leadership of Dev Banerjee updating those documents, they were published just this year. And the updated standards include 16840-10 as the recommended flammability standard. They also include note of 16840-3 as the static and impact and fatigue testing for backs and postural support devices. So here's a little clip showing where that's published. It's the referee method, 16840-10. And it points to that standard for the rationale for the use of the test method. It still does allow EN 1021-2 or 8191 as alternatives. And part of the thought there was that we didn't want everyone to have to retest their components, their wheelchair components. So this gives that grandfathering time and an alternative. So that got us to 2021. We published the standard, it's out there. It's published in the European wheelchair standards. Throughout that process, as I mentioned, the 2021 version made note of alternate heat sources. And one of our members in the ISO working group, Matthew Kosh from BodyPoint, had done quite a bit of work in his lab developing a proposed apparatus that was just a more cost-effective method than the heater cartridge, very easy to build, easy to obtain the components. And so that thought was that here's an example of another apparatus you can use. But we wanted to take it further and do some validation of that proposed method, do some interlaboratory testing, and see if we could add those details to the standard for labs to be able to utilize this easier, more cost-effective method. So after having the experience of the single lab, we reached out to 5 different labs that participated this year. Everyone received the same apparatus, the same components, set up their own systems. We had the proposed test methods to use to see if this nichrome coil would give similar results with similar samples across all those labs and to help us fine-tune the instructions and the method. So we started by looking at the temperature that is in 16840-10 to see if this is, first of all, a reasonable temperature from the work that was done originally when the standard was published in 2014. That temperature is 575 Celsius with a tolerance. And we found in the literature some typical burn ranges of cigarettes when they're insulated and smoldering, cigarettes just burning out in the air, unventilated, electrically heated cigarettes. And so we found we're still happy with this temperature. If anything, you might say that it's still very aggressive. You could argue that maybe a lower temperature might be more appropriate, but we thought we'll just start by validating and testing to the level that's proposed now. So that hot wire coil was tested with phase changing paint. So you can hook up the wire coil to your power source and increase the amperage. You can apply a phase change paint with a known temperature that it will change color. So by working with that, with multiple paints and multiple amperage settings on the device, we were able to dial in the temperature range that the standard calls out and get pretty close, 545 Celsius to 605 Celsius. So we confirmed that 2 to 2.5 amps in this device, when it's made with the same number of coils, the same wire material, etc., all the same conditions, would give you this temperature range we're looking at. And it produced a burn that looks like what you see here on the left when it was applied to some cotton muslin cloth. So you can see on the lower right corner what an actual cigarette looks like on the cloth. And so visually, it's a pretty similar appearance. So that looked good. We did look at what happens if you dial the amperage down more toward this unvented cigarette temperature range and electrically heated cigarettes. And we didn't even burn the cloth. And so we thought that's too low. So let's stick with the range that we identified here, 2 to 2.5 amps. So these are some videos that were shot to show how they will play. There we go. So here's an actual cigarette measuring the typical length of the ash, which correlates rather closely to the proposed overall dimensions of the wire coil. So we, of course, are recommending and controlling the airflow in this test chamber so that we have similar results. The time at which the cigarette or ignition source is applied. And then reviewing those results to see if it did indeed look like the burn from the cigarette. But then we also wanted to have a way to further verify the output of the system. So calibrating with the phase changing paint was really complicated. The paint's a little hard to get. It's kind of difficult to see the temperature range. So we thought, can we do something dead simple? Can we just use a small piece of paper to help calibrate that coil and the amperage setting? And so we had some initial results that looked pretty good. You can, when you're in that range of that 2 to 2.5 amps, that's giving the burn pattern we want. We found that a piece of paper will ignite within 10 to 14 seconds. And so we thought maybe that's a simple way we can help validate this setting. So that's what we also asked the labs that participated to do, to take a look at their systems, adjust the amperage from 2 to 2.5 amps, and put the paper between those coils and record how long it takes for that paper to ignite. So we wanted to see how repeatable the results were across the labs, how reproducible. This is the graph of the results. We had 2 sets of results from, this is the first lab, second lab, third lab, and fourth. We tracked what their findings were, how many seconds it took the paper to ignite at the different amperage levels, again, with the exact same setups in their labs. And it was nice to see that the results were really tight. So we were able to settle on that 2 to 2.3 amp range, giving us some pretty even results. We found ignition was about 10 to 14 seconds. It's an easy way to calibrate the system. And so that was our recommendation for the standard. If we use this method, that's how the settings can be calibrated and confirmed. And these were the results from the lab. So you can see we have similar burn patterns across the labs at the different amperage settings. And we liked the ones in the middle, trying to narrow our tolerances, but still give some working room. We did like that those burn patterns did correlate to what we saw with the cigarette ash. And so our recommendation back to the working group after several months of this back and forth with the labs was that we would like to introduce the hot wire build instructions and components and more of the details on how to use this method into ISO 16840-10. And so that was formally proposed. That work began in June after a short meeting there in Dublin. We updated the draft document to give all the details so that everyone can easily procure those components and build them. And we clarified the method and presented this in the meeting in Berlin just this October. The working group agreed with this approach. We added the annex to ISO 16840-10, and that just went out this week for balloting. So this just gives you a little snapshot to try to show you that all of those details are very well spelled out about how to build now this device. And hopefully those of you that are active in the wheelchair seating standards groups will see this in your ballot box rather soon. And this is a view of the timeline, because as we know, all of our standards are voluntary. So we're very interested in when and how this will be further adopted by different regulatory bodies. So on the right, I've got in the US, the FDA currently still recognizes ISO 7176-16, even though this new standard replaced it. So we have a committee member on our seating committee from the FDA and also on the wheelchair committee that Bill Ammer chairs. They support it, and they say that manufacturers can utilize 16840-10, but they're hesitant to take 7176-16 off their list. So it's kind of interesting from the US. In Europe, it is published in those European wheelchair standards, but now those standards have to be adopted by the European Commission to become part of the medical device requirements. And all of the product requirements for wheelchairs and for every other medical device will be going through that process. They are really behind in that process. And the documents themselves need to be updated with an annex that the European Commission reviews. So that's a whole process along the path toward it becoming a legal requirement in Europe. So we're on that journey now. The MDR expected date for having a list of harmonized product standards by the European Commission is summer of 2024. So it wouldn't surprise me if that were pushed further, but that's where we are right now. So that's the current flammability story. Any questions?
Yeah, can I ask one, Cara? You explained that the committee, Working Group 11, adopted a risk management approach. Is there any way you could skip back to those references?
Yes, absolutely.
Because I've also been looking at. Oh, that's different.
Sorry, let me see if it's hard to skip back quickly. There we go.
Yeah, I mean, I could ask. Did you look at? Did you come across a safety a guidance document from ISO IEC called Guide 51? Safety aspects, guidelines for their inclusion in standards.
I don't recall that one. No.
And did you come across another standard called ISO 10377? Its title is Consumer Product Safety Guidelines for Suppliers. Very, very rich documents on risk and risk management and the approach that ISO and SEN standards would take when addressing subjects that include risk management. And I think that by inclusion of those requirements written into those ISO guidance document and 10377, it does go a long way to help drafters of European standards meet Annex ZA, which will give the compliance to regulatory requirements, which is a major step and very arduous to achieve. I can't. Right. Can I see there? I can see letters.
Yeah, I don't.
It's I'll tell you what.
I think that we did. If you could send it, I would greatly appreciate it.
Yeah, it's not a fat document, but it does give some wonderful guidelines for people in our position who are writing safety standards or standards that have safety matters included. Essential reading, I would say, Cara.
That'd be terrific. Thank you. Yeah, I can tell you our general approach with this was from 14971 and looking at the shifted perspective of the MDR of heavily weighing the benefits and then looking at the risks and the unintended consequences. So happy to have, anything that can help further support this and especially help the regulators in this process.
Yeah, and ZA is a challenge.
Right.
I'm on that one. I'll ping that across to Stephanie. One has got copyright on it, but I think the guide is freely available. But I might have to accidentally send you a copy of 10377. Oops, a daisy. That sort of stuff.
That'd be terrific. Thank you.
Or I'll make Barrent aware of its. I'll send it to Barrent, and he'll no doubt send it on to you.
Yep, sounds good. Thank you.
Thank you, Cara. I don't know if someone else has another question about the flammability test. If not, I think we can go to the lab certification perspective. I think that we have a lot of centers that are interested in that topic in specific. Cara, just so you know, we actually had a meeting probably like a month ago with a group from India, the lab Our Duty Do. They are interested in whether it is beneficial for them to have the lab certified and whether that is gonna be a requirement for them in any way to complete any kind of testing in the future. And the other part is that they were also looking forward to see in what way ISWP would be able to help so that the standards that they are completing in their lab can also be recognized in other parts of the world so that some of their products can also be recognized as feasible for their market. So just giving you that a heads up, because I know that they were not able to join us today, but those are some of the thoughts they had.
Okay, yeah, terrific. So we had some discussion about this very topic in a previous meeting, and I'll just pop through it at a high level because I know not everyone on this call attended that meeting. So we've been looking at the requirements for testing facilities within our working group because, in part, the standards for wheelchair seating are really boutique standards that are very specific and unique. They're not the same as a lot of mechanical standards that are more broadly applied, and maybe even more unique than the standards for wheelchairs themselves. But the wheelchairs themselves are kind of in a similar situation. You can't go to hundreds of labs around the world and find places that can do your testing. So we wanted to really understand what's appropriate, who's asking for what level of certification, and what can we do from being within the ISO world to help with this process. So we looked at good laboratory practices versus ISO 17025. So ISO 17025 is that very general standard that really verifies that a laboratory has good laboratory practices, and it applies to all industries and all testing. And it is often required by different industries or customers or regions. But for us specifically for wheelchairs and wheelchair seating, we wanted to see where is it asked for in our world. So looking at the FDA in the US requires good laboratory practice, and they spell out what that means. The requirements for the personnel and their qualifications, the facilities, the controls, the equipment, the calibration, the record keeping, all of those things you would expect from a laboratory that does things in a scientific way, an appropriate way. And of course, 17025 includes that same philosophy and very similar requirements. So 17025 certification could satisfy what the FDA asks for. However, having just an internal process and procedures maybe under a 13485 certification, for example, for a manufacturer, they could demonstrate that their laboratory meets all of these requirements without having to be 17025 certified or an independent lab or anyone else. So that's the FDA perspective. In Europe, in looking at the new medical device requirements and the old ones, there, again, good laboratory practice is called out. And so it's a similar situation. They do not specify that the laboratories utilized be 17025 certified. That, of course, would satisfy this requirement, but it's not the only path. Same with the European standards for wheelchairs, and same with the ISO standards for wheelchairs and wheelchair seating. What we find is that the requirement for 17025 lab certification typically comes from tender bodies and different regulatory groups. So it's not written into the standards. It usually is a customer or region-based request. Sometimes you will see within a particular standard that 17025 or equivalent can be utilized. So there's a little bit of guidance there. So knowing how difficult it is to sometimes find labs that can do all these tests, we wanted to have that conversation within our working group, and we've had that here with this group. We've gotten a lot of input from several of you in the last call and even afterwards. Looking at this from both standpoints, on the one hand, being 17025 certified is really clear for a customer or a regulatory body. There's no question on paper, you should be a great lab to provide these services if your scope includes the specific tests for wheelchairs or wheelchair seating. It's pretty easy to tick those boxes, and it does show due diligence is done, everything's controlled and appropriate. It can sometimes, though, be a little misleading. I've spoken to some big labs that have said, sure, they add these to their scope, but a wheelchair test might not be what they typically do. And so even though it may be under the scope of their certification, it's not their expertise. They might get one call a year and do a test, and they have to dust off the procedure and figure it out again and deal with the nuances of our unique testing. So that's just a small caveat, that just because a lab is 17025 certified doesn't mean they have the expertise for these somewhat unique tests. So we thought about whether there was some guidance language we could write explaining this, and also adding that basically we want a lab with good laboratory practices, whether that's their own system or 17025 certified, and we want them to have the expertise of these standards in particular. It's not just a simple compression failure test or more typical testing you can find anywhere in the world. You really do need to have some expertise to go with this. We also know that a lot of the smaller labs can't afford to get the 17025 certification, which is really expensive. So trying to grapple with all these things and find a way forward. Within our working group, we came up with some proposed language, but we couldn't find agreement about how to frame it properly so that it was used appropriately and opened up opportunities for testing while still making sure that only labs that were really qualified and doing this in a controlled way could be utilized. So we took this language to SC1 and to TC 173 in the recent plenary meetings in Berlin, and had some discussion about it. The perspective from SC1 and TC173 was that they did not want to make a public statement, a formal written statement about lab certification. They said, basically, the standards are created so that anyone can do this testing, and that's the scope of the reach of ISO. They don't reach into regulatory requirements or recommending which standards should build upon which and go with which. And they said that's exactly why we don't have written into our test standards, you shall be 17025 certified to perform this test. They also, though, we asked the question, can we have like clarification stating that basically, that ISO doesn't require that a test lab be 17025 certified. And they hesitated to do that as well because they didn't want there to be an implication that there was any issue with 17025 certification. So in the end, the decision was that no statement would be made about this. Within our working group, we had created this wheelchair and wheelchair seating standards reference guide. We're still thinking about, is there some guidance we could give here, which we would, of course, take back to SC1 to see if that was acceptable. But that's the state of things right now, as of the last plenary meeting.
Thank you. I actually have a question. So for the best practices or the good practices that you mentioned, is that a document that has some guidelines that are open to the public?
Yeah, the FDA does a nice job of spelling those out, what they consider to be good laboratory practice. And they are very, very much in line with 17025. So I can send you the link to that page from the FDA. So you could share it.
Yeah, and the other question I had is going back to the cost. Is there going to be any consideration for low and middle income countries that cannot afford that cost? Like, I don't know if it's only like in terms of the country, but also the number of employees in the test lab, because like a lot of our test labs may not necessarily be big and doing other testing beyond wheelchair related tests. But I think that the smaller testing centers may be benefited from this kind of certification in some way, if that is a requirement in their national regulations. So I don't know if there's any thoughts about how they can help those smaller testing labs if this is going to become a requirement in certain areas.
So I think that I feel like from the state of things today, and even the discussions in the ISO meeting, really that responsibility still falls on whoever's interacting with the regulatory body that's making the request, to basically say if a particular country is asking for this testing and they want the lab to be 17025 certified, we need to have that conversation with them to say, well, here's why that may not work in this country or this region, and here's what's unique about our tests, and try to work with them to get those requirements changed for that particular tender or facility or whoever's doing the asking. We were hoping if we had black and white language we could point to, it would make that conversation easier. But because everything you say is true, there's a lot of cost and expense. That's a real burden on some labs, some regions, and so forth. And all of that needs to be considered.
Kara, on the cost, could I just chime in for a second? This is Evan.
Please.
One of the biggest problems with cost is the proficiency demonstration. So when you're certifying as a 17025 certified lab, you have to demonstrate proficiency. So to your concerns about, do the labs know if it's a big lab and they're not doing many, are they proficient? Well, that's addressed by the fact that you have to perform a proficiency demonstration that requires a certain number of times that it's been performed recently. The place where we might be able to help the small labs, the place where this organization has a chance to bring that cost down is in that proficiency test. Because when there is not a group of labs that are performing the same test, you have to perform the test with 3 different testers on various products and demonstrate the results. However, if there are multiple labs participating, which this is the hard part, right? We don't have multiple labs. If there are multiple labs, then the proficiency becomes demonstrate that one certified lab gets the same result as another lab that's attempting to certify, and it reduces the cost significantly. I would propose that we look at wherever these labs are that want to do that, we start participating together in that certification proficiency process, because it literally cuts the cost of that process to 1/3. Now, all the rest of the stuff, the cost is still there, which, is not insignificant, but it's very, very helpful. In our process, I suspect this would save $7,000 or $8,000 a year in the certification costs. So I guess I'm just throwing out there that I would hope that our organization here could create a board of who's doing what tests and share proficiency lists so that we could do that less expensively.
Yeah, I think, well, we have the information about the testing lab centers that are doing certain tests already. So I think it would be interesting to know from the testing labs who are interested in doing this proficiency test. Because my question would be like, can we do, for example, ISWP as one testing lab? And I don't know, in this case, it could be your lab and another lab from a different country and have that proficiency test from different countries, or do they have to be all the testing labs from the same country?
No, they just have to be a certified lab. They can be anywhere. And that's the beauty of this organization, right? Because it's international. We have broad reach.
Okay. And the other question is, can they do, for instance, the fatigue testing or the double drum in this case as the proficiency test? Does it need to be just one test method, or do they need to be all of them the same?
You demonstrate proficiency on everything you list in your scope of certification, which is why this becomes important, because if we list all of the tests in 16840, we have to demonstrate proficiency on all of those tests. So being able to do it in the less expensive method, demonstrating the same results as another lab, becomes a huge cost savings when you're doing that for 8 or 10 or 12 tests.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
This actually answers that. I wish Dean was on the call, because this answers the challenge we're facing, is there are no other certified test labs that we can compare with, that we know of within Africa. So it was the big roadblock for us for getting our testing center registered as a lab. So I'd love to take this forward with Dean in a discussion, please.
Could I just comment one more thing? Kara, fabulous job here. This is an immense amount of information and very, very important material, and you've done an excellent job of presenting it and making it clear and digestible. So thank you for all your efforts there. That's impressive presentation and nice job.
Thanks, appreciate it, Evan.
Yeah, definitely. It was very helpful, everything you shared. And I think it was like a big step for also communicating with future testing labs who are interested. So thank you for giving the perspective. I think that knowing that even the statement couldn't be made at this time, like also Evan's comment is very important here too. So I would say that on my end, I'll be reaching out to the testing centers to see who would like to proceed. And I see Kyoki has a question. I just see your camera. Please go ahead.
Yeah, thanks. So we're just introducing a product to the market now in multiple countries. So I wanted to just share our experience. You know, we do the 7176 test. We have the flammability test, biocompatibility. I agree that unification of test lab certification would be very helpful. So the challenge now is we've done the testing a couple of times, and then we go to different markets. Kenya now requires one of two vendors to do their testing in China. And then Brazil wants to have their own testing done in Brazil. They only like their labs. I think we're going to run into this a couple of other places. So in some of those, in some of those countries, the cost of the test is actually more than the cost of the test of the USA. It's really kind of a shock. So then, the total cost for developing our wheelchair product is, maybe in the $400,000 range. If we want to enter the Brazil, Europe, USA, Kenya, and a couple of other markets, just the testing cost is going to be $150,000. So the challenge then becomes, okay, we want the products to be affordable. We want the, probably competitors from, India and other less resource settings who have lower labor costs and so on and so forth to develop products that they can serve their markets and compete in the global market. This creates a huge barrier. So one thing that I would not want to see is like two quality levels of testing labs, because then in a less resource setting, you've got a testing lab that somehow meets their own national requirement or something like that, and then those competitors are not able to compete outside their country because their whole product line is meeting this like lower standard, which will tend to make the quality of the products in that country lower over time because the government will protect those manufacturers. And then also I just think that the realities of like the huge number of people that need wheelchairs and need lower cost wheelchairs, and the manufacturers that need to be resourced, empowered, and so on with standards to serve those. Like this is a big issue. Like how do we achieve these things? So I wonder if there are these test labs that are certified, can they somehow provide discounts to manufacturers that are coming from less resource settings? That to me seems like a better way to go about it, as opposed to a different way to get the registrations done or the certifications done. Thanks.
That's a very large subject, isn't it, really? I mean, I'm sure that Shona would kick in here. I think that, and our chums from Uganda as well, where perhaps the requirements for durability of mobility devices in third world settings are far more aggressive than they are in perhaps the US or the UK or Europe. And it might be that if Shona and her colleagues in Africa were to develop test methods which reflected the usage conditions, the conditions of usage, they would exceed those written into Part 8 of 7176. Accreditation, or as 17025 awarded by a national body, and certification become two different topics completely. And I would have thought that the majority of our concerns are in providing wheelchairs in less resource settings. Perhaps we should broaden our view on what we're trying to achieve.
Yeah, I absolutely support that, Rob. I think the need for multiple labs across different countries and regions is vital. And I think the input from the south to the north is vital in these discussions. Standards have been set historically, and the time, you can see by the number of people in this call, to shift this is right now, and it's coming.
Yeah, and I also have a question. Maybe Cara, Bill, and those who are participating in ISO, maybe you know this better. I found one of the documents, I cannot remember the exact name, but it's basically the idea of mentoring. So when one lab would teach the other how to proceed in certain tests or standards in a specific. Is that something that you are aware of on how that is possible?
I'm personally not familiar.
In a way, that's what we're talking about, where one lab pays the cost to essentially create the proficiency in-house, and then that becomes the seed or the lab that can then start to provide the support to other labs that can then just demonstrate that they get the same results as the lab that first developed the proficiency. So the process becomes a mentoring in that sense, because the first lab has to have 3 people internally demonstrated on multiple products that, you know, their level of proficiency is satisfactory and that they fall within a certain range of error. And then once that exists, it's much easier for the other labs to then just compare to that lab. So I'm sitting here with our kind of lead test person, Marianne Russin, and she just whispered, we should try to set up a GoFundMe or something to send us over to Africa to work with Shona, because, you know, we'd be happy to go do that, right? And we're always looking to expand our scope and the number of tests that are in it, but it is a very expensive process. So working together, we can help each other with that.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Thank you. There you go, Matt.
Apologies, I've been kind of out of the loop for really a couple of years here, and I think we just lost John. But once upon a time, there was a big effort to independently fundraise so that individual people taking initiative to bring products to market were not faced with this cost. Yet at the same time, vulnerable people who are not well protected by normal market mechanisms would not end up with crappy products. And so there was this initiative to sort of get third-party funding. Does anyone know the history of that, whether that was kind of a pipe dream or whether that is something that we think might succeed in the future?
I am not aware of that. Mm-hmm.
Slightly on the pipe dream scale, I think, Matt.
I was afraid someone would say that. Thank you.
Yeah, that's the reality of it, I believe.
Well, thank you everyone for this discussion. I'm definitely going to take a look into the information we have about the testing labs at the moment and see how we can start to get this going. Thank you again, Cara, for your presentation. Both presentations were great. And I would like to go back to Bill. I know you would like to share some updates with the group.
Okay. Can I share my screen, Stephanie?
Yes.
Okay. I know that most of you are familiar with how ISO is configured, but I thought I'd just run through this very quickly. Do you see my screen?
Yep.
It says technical committees.
Mm-hmm.
So this is the ISO portal. And as far as how ISO is configured or set up here, the question at the top of the screen here, who develops standards? And the answer is technical committees. And within ISO, there are literally a couple hundred technical committees. And if you go to this website, you can find all of these technical committees that you can look at what the scope of each technical committee is. Kara already mentioned that we are part of TC 173. So if we tab down here to TC 173, we're looking at assistive products. And within TC 173, if I follow this down, each technical group or technical committee has its own page, and you can find out who is in charge. Joachim Falk is our committee manager for TC 173. And then within TC 173, there are working groups, and there are also subcommittees. And the subcommittee that we work within for wheelchairs is SC1. And within SC1, there are 4 working groups. WG1 is the one that I chair. Stephanie is the secretary for that committee. WG6 is wheelchair restraint systems, and that's chaired by Alid Hextra. And WG10 is requirements and test methods for electrotechnical systems for wheelchairs. So any of the powered wheelchair testing requirements are through WG10. And then WG11 is the wheelchair seating committee, and that's chaired by Takashi Honda, along with Baron and Kara. I personally am a member of all of the committees except WG6. So that's just a little outline of how ISO works. So within SC1, we've got 39 published standards. And if you take a look at this, it'll give you a list of all the current standards that are available under that subcommittee. And over on the right-hand side here, it tells you the status of those standards, the stage. And if you click on the stage, it'll give you an outline of what that means. But I just thought I'd run through that really quickly with you here. So back in October, at the end of October, we all got together in Berlin, Germany for a week-long set of meetings having to do with all of the working groups in SC1, as well as our SC1 plenary committee meeting and the TC 173 meeting as well. Had a lot of work get done in our working groups. That was my first meeting as convener of WG1, so it was an exciting time for me as well. I've been working standards almost 25 years now, but this is my first venture as a ISO convener. This is really important work, and if you are looking to get a little more involved in what's going on, I would encourage you to get involved in a standards committee. You learn a whole lot more about what we're trying to do here and some of the reasoning behind it. So I don't know that I have anything else to add. Maybe Kara would have something to add. She was.
I think she just left, Bill. She had to join another meeting.
Oh, okay. And Dave Brienza was there as well. I'm trying to think of who else on the panel here was there. I know Stephanie attended virtually, but it was a really informative set of meetings.
Yeah, I'm a working group 6 member, Bill. I think we can, if anyone wants to know about the goings on within working group 6, I think that Nicole and I can bring people up to speed. Hey, Nicole.
I saw, yeah, Nicole's on. So I can't emphasize enough the importance of being involved in the standards committees. And you know, we're getting a lot of crossover here between Shauna and her group. You know, I've just done some work with Kiyoki. I'm also working with is it Steve Williams?
Yeah.
From
Kyaninga.
And they're looking to set up a test lab as well for testing their bamboo manufactured wheelchairs. So it's pretty important work. So think about getting involved. Thank you.
Thank you, Bill. I know that we're getting a little bit short on time, so we're gonna jump really quick for Jack or Holly. I don't know which one of you would like to go first.
I can go first. I don't have too many updates, but the one big one I do want to share with everyone is that the publication for the caster bearing versus bushing study that we have been working on has officially been published, and I can share with you the link to that. So this was work that I did as part of my master's thesis, looking at comparing thermoplastic bushings versus traditional high-end and low-end metallic ball bearings as a suitable, cost-effective, and durable replacement for a rolling element, especially in adverse environments. So this is some work that came directly out of, you know, the work of this ISWP standards working group. So I just want to pass this along because it's great to have this out, and it's going to be very useful for future research and future, you know, advancements. So give it a read, pass it along. I know we're very excited about it. So that's my biggest update. The other thing is that our equipment for caster testing here at Pitt was down for a little bit of time, but it is now back up and running. So we should be resuming tests and doing other studies soon. And then I just want to give a quick shout out to Norman Reese, who was kind enough to donate his remaining casters, wheels, equipment, testing equipment to Pitt to use. So we'll definitely be using those spare casters and whatnot for some tests coming up. So that's all I have. I want to keep it quick for everyone. Those are the biggest things. So thank you.
Thank you, Jack. Holly, would you like to go next?
Yeah, I can give a quick update. So I think last time I shared, I'm working on a decision support tool that helps clinicians select rear wheels and casters. I've been continuing that work and doing, actually showing this tool to clinicians, interviewing them, getting feedback, and then refining the tool. So I've been through kind of 3 major revisions with that, and it's really improving. I'm excited to keep moving on this, but I don't have it ready to show people yet, but I'm hopeful that, you know, in the next couple of months, it will get to a point where it's fully refined. But it's been really insightful to have clinicians actually try using it, see where things don't work well, and kind of make a whole new iteration. So that's kind of exciting. And so it's moving ahead, and maybe by the next meeting, I'll have something to demo for everyone.
Thank you, Holly. I don't know if someone else has anything to add to the group before we finish today's meeting. But if not, I want to wish you all happy holidays, happy new year. I hope you spend beautiful time with your family and friends, loved ones, pets, everything. I just want to let you know, please expect some emails from me. I'll try to reach out to testing centers and see how we can start the movement on the proficiency that we just discussed. If you have any testing centers that have not been here and you are aware of, please, if you can help me put me in contact with them, we would love to see this grow. Even if they are new to testing, they are welcome to join us. Here we are for learning as well. So I want to say bye and thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye.
Bye.
Happy holidays.
Happy holidays.
Happy holidays.
Bye, everyone.